Hello and welcome to South Asia Focus. I'm Mugdha Kapoor. This week we talk to Rory Mungoven, the Asia Pacific head of the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, on the current human rights situation in post-election Afghanistan, Pakistan, and how the war crimes trials in Bangladesh have been shaping up. Two candidates in the generally unclear Afghan presidential elections, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah Abdullah, signed a unity deal. The deal ended the long-standing tensions following post-the-election results. Prior to the signing of the deal, both Ghani and Abdullah claimed to have won the election, and the United Nations pushed hard for a national unity government to prevent a return to the ethnic divisions created by the civil war of the 1990s. Mungoven said the UN welcomed the near-peaceful transition of power in Afghanistan and the subsequent agreement between the two candidates.
Well, we of course look at it from a human rights perspective, and while the conflict has brought tremendous suffering to the civilian population, civilian casualties, women, children killed and maimed, and increasingly at the hand of the insurgency rather than by international forces or strikes and the like. But at the same time, you can see the roots of improvement in Afghanistan. Some of the rule of law institutions that have begun to function, some of the new enactments for women, some of the important reforms that have been brought in over the past decade. So it'll be critically important as the whole security arrangement changes, as international forces withdraw, as Afghan government and forces take increased responsibility, to make sure there's no erosion, no rollback, no undermining of those very important gains that have been made. The second thing, I think, is really to involve the people. One of the most important aspects of any peace process is that participatory dimension, and bringing the voices of civil society, the media, and in particular in the case of Afghanistan, women to the fore as a positive voice, a positive force for peace.
He also said, though there has been an improvement in the human rights situation in Afghanistan and in the condition of women due to tough laws, the recent Kabul gang rape cum death sentence was worrying. Afghan authorities executed 5 men convicted of armed robbery and gang rape in a case that resulted in an outpouring of huge public outrage across the country. Former President Hamid Karzai had during his tenure approved and signed the execution on his last day in office. In August, a group of men, some dressed in police uniforms, sexually assaulted 4 women of a Kabul family. 7 culprits were originally sentenced to death in a trial last month, but a court reduced 2 of the sentences to up to 20 years in prison. The verdict was also later upheld by the Afghanistan Supreme Court.
One of the important achievements in Afghanistan the UN has helped very much with has been the enactment of new laws against violence against women and the creation of new institutions to enforce those laws. It's still early days in terms of the use and enforcement of the law, of course, but more and more, year on year, we see cases of domestic violence, violence against women being brought to the courts under these laws, and that of course increases the sphere of protection for women. The sad thing is this can go to the other extreme. Just this month we've had this terrible case of robbery and gang rape. It's now been fast-tracked through the courts in Afghanistan. Death penalty has been awarded. That will still be subject to appeal. It's like the debate in India after the gang rapes in Delhi, which of course really generated a huge popular movement against violence against women. The problem is when that leads all the way then to new applications of the death penalty and a kind of thirst for vengeance and very retributive justice in the form of capital punishment. And it's unfortunate that genuine efforts to address violence against women can lead to that extreme and perhaps shift support in favour of the death penalty.
Human rights groups criticized the hasty trial and the death penalty awarded in this rape case. Mungoven also expressed concern over the human rights situation in parts of Pakistan, especially in the Waziristan area, where militants and the Pakistan Army are locked in a fierce battle that has engulfed civilians as well. He also said that rising sectarian violence in the country was a dangerous trend. Till 2012 in Pakistan, more than 10,000 Shia Muslims had been massacred and targeted killings are still continuing unabated.
Well, clearly Pakistan is racked with terrorism and the kinds of violence committed against the civilian population in the name of one cause or another, one sectarian group or another, is really shocking. And the government, of course, has a responsibility to take whatever measures it can on the security side to arrest that trend and to protect the population. The problem is when counter-terrorism measures then flow over into maybe what we would say was an excessive use of force or emergency powers, and you begin to see problems of extrajudicial killings, disappearances, or the civilians being caught up in counter-insurgency operations as is happening in the tribal areas. So finding this balance between security and human rights is critically important for Pakistan. We're lucky in Pakistan that there is a strong and vibrant civil society that stands out against extremism, against terror, and also holds the government to account as best it can in terms of the way in which it conducts these operations. Well, one of the important trends, I think, in Pakistan over the past 5, 6, 7 years has been this consolidation of civilian government. We've had a civilian government, a democratically elected government, for the first time run its full term, and now, of course, transfer power to another party for its term in government. And with each of these political cycles, I think that strength of civilian control over the military and security apparatus can only strengthen. I think the functioning of the courts and its role as a kind of accountability mechanism for the different parts of government, including the security forces, can only strengthen.
While speaking on the war crimes trial in Bangladesh, Mungoven said there was no doubt that the perpetrators needed to be brought to justice, but added that the UN was not in favor of the death penalty. Bangladeshis are still struggling to get closure to the wounds of 1971. Pakistani troops in 1971, along with the help of local collaborators, attempted to crush a nationalist revolution in the East Pakistan that was triggered by the jailing of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was later declared Bangabandhu, or father of the nation. The war ended with the creation of Bangladesh after Indian forces helped defeat Pakistan's army. But in the process, about 3 million people died and about 200,000 women were raped, creating a significant case of human rights violations and war crimes. The War Crimes Tribunal set up by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina convicted many top Jamaat-e-Islami leaders involved in the genocide, and Abdul Qadir Maula was sentenced to death and later hanged. This was despite the UN appealing to the Bangladesh government to halt the execution.
It's still in process, and we've seen, of course, the first cases come through the tribunal, and the first verdicts issued, and even the first execution carried out. I think there has been a process of learning as it's gone along, and we hope very much that in the later stages of proceedings, the appeal stages, the review by the Supreme Court of these judgments, that very careful attention can be given to some of the shortcomings that have come up during the trial process. At the end of the day, whatever the nature of the crime, even war crimes of this kind, the UN doesn't believe the death penalty is the answer. Even in our international tribunals, in the International Criminal Court, the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the death penalty is not there, because there's a recognition that ultimate sanction, that ultimate action by the state to deprive someone, even guilty of their life, actually aggravates and compounds and undermines human values rather than affirms and supports human values going forward.
Did the UN intervene after the execution or in the war crime trials, after the war crime trials?
Yes, a number of appeals were made by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, by many of the special rapporteurs, in relation to the first verdicts that came from the Bangladesh tribunal. And the emphasis has been very much on justice being seen to be done. Even when the death penalty applies, there's a need for the most rigorous fair trial standard, the most strict due process and observance of international standards of fair trial. In this case, there were many questions about the way in which the trials have been conducted, and then for the death penalty to be awarded and carried out in those circumstances raises even more questions. But for the UN, the death penalty itself is really something that we would rather see governments refrain from, adopt a moratorium.
Lastly, Mungoven said the situation in South Asia is improving, with countries like India, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Pakistan being functional democracies. With the smooth transfer of power in Afghanistan and recent elections in Bangladesh, the future bodes well for the region.
If you look at South Asia as a whole, you would have to say there's a very positive turn and opportunity historically. For the first time, almost all of the SAARC countries are in a democratic period of government. Periods of military rule and dictatorship have ended and civilian democracies have come to the fore. You've got, in many cases, good rule of law institutions, particularly the higher courts and so forth, that have a lot of competence, a lot of sophistication when it comes to human rights issues. You've got national institutions, national human rights commissions in almost all of the countries. Very active civil society, and now, of course, this explosion of all of the independent private media, social media. So these are really very strong drivers for positive change in the region. The problem, of course, is that there's a huge gap in terms of capacity, gap in terms of the scale and enormity of some of the social and economic problems, and a gap often in terms of real political will, to knuckle down and tackle human rights issues at their root cause.
The United Nations has undoubtedly played an important role in conflict zones, not only in South Asia but across the world. But no one will disagree that a lot still needs to be done on the human rights front in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan. That is all we have this week. Thank you for watching South Asia Focus.